guys, it's Anna from Bright Lane Gardens, and today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite things, and that is growing blueberries. Specifically today, we're going to talk about growing blueberries in containers. Blueberries make a great option for container gardening as long as you're planting the right varieties, using the right soil blend, and knowing what type of container will work best for your growing needs. Today we're going to go through a step-by-step tutorial on exactly what I do to plant my blueberries in containers, starting with which type of blueberry varieties grow best in containers, what I use in my custom soil blend to really grow strong, healthy blueberry plants in containers, what I use for soil acidifier and fertilizer, and of course, what type of container will work best for growing blueberries. While I've got you here, if you like this type of content, please subscribe to our channel. It immensely helps out small businesses like ours and encourages us to keep producing the content that we've been producing. By the end of the episode today, I sure hope that you're encouraged to go ahead and grow your container blueberries so you can have cute little blueberries like this next summer. Starting with the basics, the very first step that you need to take when you are planting a container blueberry is selecting the right variety to be planted in a container. Some blueberry varieties can grow exceptionally tall, upwards of 8 feet or more. These are called high bush blueberry varieties. These are very common here in northern Michigan. They grow exceptionally well up here, and yes, there are some of them that can be planted in containers. It's important to note that when you're working with a high bush variety, it's unlikely that it will reach its full size potential as it would in the ground. However, pruning back appropriately can still encourage that excellent fruit production that you see on some of the in-ground blueberry plants. Off to my left here, this is a container grown blueberry plant that I actually started 2 years ago. Believe it or not, this guy is called a top hat blueberry, and the top hat blueberry is one of the most container friendly blueberry varieties that you can choose. It is obviously a low bush blueberry. Low bush meaning it's going to stay low to the ground and nice and compact, which makes it really perfect for container gardens. Now, this is a pretty small container. This is only a 3-gallon container that I'm holding in my lap here. If I had a larger one, I would have chosen a larger one. However, the top hat can actually get away with growing in a 3-gallon container for the first several years at minimum. This year, if I have enough time and energy, I might go ahead and outplant him into a 5-gallon container, but he will be happy in this container for at least a couple more years. As you can see, I have a lot of really healthy foliage on this, and if you look closely, you can see some little clusters of blueberries have started to form. I'm very excited for these to ripen. I've been having to hide them from my toddler so he doesn't pick them while they're still green, but in just a couple months here, we should see them turn that beautiful purple blue hue that we're used to, and then he'll be able to go ahead and pick those. And this one right here is a North Blue blueberry variety. This one also grows very well in Michigan. This is technically still a low bush blueberry. It does grow a little bit taller than the top hat variety that you see here. The reason that I'm going to plant this one today is I really want to see a larger berry. The top hat does produce lots of berries, but they're a little bit smaller. They're really perfect for baking pastries or pies. My toddler loves to eat raw blueberries, so I'm really hoping that this North Blue blueberry will be the one to produce the nice large blueberries that you're used to seeing at the grocery store. The second thing to keep in mind anytime you are considering planting any plant in a container that's typically planted in the ground is you really need to make sure that your soil mix is perfect for that plant. What I mean here is anytime you're planting something in the ground has a ton of natural organic material that's already there. Leaves break down every year, pine needles break down every year. It has this mulching effect naturally on top. So really there's a lot of bioactivity happening in soil that's already in the ground. You, as a container gardener, need to recreate that activity inside of a container. This sounds harder than it actually is. All you need to do is some really basic research on what your plant's specific needs are and how you can recreate that inside of a container. No need to do your research for the blueberries because I've got you covered today. So off to my right here, we are a plant nursery. So when we mix up our custom soil blends, we mix them up in mass quantities. This guy right here is specific to my blueberries, and I have a couple key ingredients in here. I always start with a really high quality garden soil. Now, the reason I want to specify a high quality organic garden soil versus a potting soil is there are a few key ingredients that I tend to find in my garden soil bags that I don't find in my potting soil bags. Potting soil tends to be a lot finer. It's more equipped to handle some of those younger baby annual plants, and it does really well for those types of plants. But when you're planting something that's going to stay in that pot for several years, you really need a robust organic presence, and I always find that in my organic garden soils. Now in here, I've also added a little bit of degraded cedar mulch. And when I say degraded, I mean it has just barely started to break down. You can see some little particles of sand in there, but for the most part, there are still some larger wood chips. This is excellent. I certainly want to mix this thoroughly within my wheelbarrow to make sure that there's not a dense population of it. But outside of that, I really want to make sure that I'm including that type of organic matter in my soil mix. The third ingredient that I love to use because it's free and it's right here in my backyard, and that is sand. We have an abundance of sand up here in northern Michigan. I add it to just about all of my soil mixes. If anything, it's just a free filler that we can use up here. But in the case of blueberries, sand actually really complements planting blueberries. It's a great addition if you want excellent drainage in your soil, which blueberries certainly want. Next ingredient that I do have interspersed in here is pine needles. I know it's a little difficult to see that. So we have a ton of white pines right around our house. We have an abundance of pine needles. Anyone up here in northern Michigan should probably say the same thing, which is actually why we do tend to have a naturally acidic soil up here. There's huge benefits to this, and it is definitely one of the reasons that blueberries grow naturally up here. They grow super great up here, so that is something that you really want to add into your soil, is something that's going to add back in some of that acidity. Now, if you live in an area that does not have a lot of pine trees or doesn't have a lot of pine needles that you can use, peat moss is another great addition. I actually have both in here. I have some pine needle mulch, and then I also have peat moss in here. Peat moss on its own is naturally acidic. It also is a very lightweight and fluffy type of material that really adds a lot of lightness to any heavy soils, and it can help improve drainage as well. And the last thing that I've added in here, which I would not add in if it was in the ground, I'm only adding this in because it is a container plant, and that is perlite. Perlite is those little rocks that you see in a lot of different potting soil mixes. It doesn't add any organic matter or any nutrient to the soil. All it does is assist in drainage, but it's a great addition for any type of container plant that you're using. The container that I'm planting with today is this 8-gallon egg planter. I love this color. I'm going to set this blueberry bush right on my deck, so I want it to be as decorative as it can be. And when blueberries are in bloom, they're actually very beautiful. So if you really want to maximize your container garden and have it be a beautiful garden as well, consider using a decorative pot. It'll cost you a little bit more, but you get a lot more use out of it. One more thing to consider when you're picking out your container, make sure it has at least one drainage hole in the bottom. A couple more is even better. We always want to make sure that we can drain the soil completely so that our blueberries don't run the risk of any root rot or sit with wet feet. I've selected my blueberry plant. Today I'm going to be gardening with this North Blue blueberry variety. The North Blue is a low bush, compact variety that is a little more upright than that top hat that I showed you earlier. One of the big reasons that I chose the North Blue was the size of the blueberries and the fact that they're a very early ripening bush, so my toddler can enjoy blueberries a little bit earlier in the season than the rest will. This North Blue blueberry was potted up by myself with one of our custom mixes as a bare root dormant plant. Anytime that you are planting a blueberry plant, I always recommend starting from a bare root plant. I have had a lot of success starting with dormant plants. Dormant plants have not yet started to sprout up any foliage or flowers, which means they have a little more wiggle room when it comes to planting before the risk of frost. Now this guy obviously does have foliage at this point. He has not flowered yet, so I do want to get him potted up before he starts to flower for the season. One more thing I wanted to add when talking about the North Blue blueberry, this is technically a self-pollinating variety, which basically means that it can produce fruit from just one blueberry bush. I do have a disclaimer when it comes to self-pollinating plants. Cross-pollination is a natural function and it really improves the fruit production of any blueberry bush. So it's very important to consider that when you're looking at plants. I know it sounds tempting to say, hey, this plant is self-fertile, so I really only need to get one. But if you are really hoping for a lot of fruit production and big, healthy berries, definitely consider increasing it to 2 because that cross-pollination really helps that fruit production. The first step I'm going to take is, of course, to fill up my container. I want to fill this guy up about 3/4 of the way full with my custom soil mix. have my planter filled up about 3/4 of the way full. As you can see, it has a lot of organic material in there. There's even a couple leaves and some sticks. This is wonderful. This will really break down and help to benefit the soil over the course of the next couple years. Next, I'm going to take my North Blue blueberry, which I have here in my hands. I'm going to grasp the plant by the base, flip it upside down, and try to catch all of the soil that's falling around it here. Flip it back up. And one of the key things I love to do anytime I am transplanting a plant that is active and not dormant is I want to gently break up these roots just a little bit. So take your thumbs and just gently move these roots apart. You'll hear a couple of them break, and that's okay. The plant will do just fine. What this does is it encourages the roots to really branch out into its new container and not continue to grow in the same pattern that they were in the smaller container. I am going to take this tag off because I want this to be decorative. I already know the name of this blueberry bush. Another thing I do is I do have an app that I track all of my plants in. So sometimes I'll just say something like, okay, the North Blue blueberry was planted in 2023 in the red egg planter. So then when I go back and look, I know what variety it is. Now, depending on where you live and what your soil type is like naturally, you may or may not need to add something to really make that soil a little bit more acidic. If you're unsure about the acidity of your soil and you really want to be successful with growing blueberries, I highly recommend that you get a pH soil tester. I'll recommend one down in the description that I use for my plants. This is really essential. Blueberries love that acidic soil, and if they don't have it, they simply won't be successful with fruit production. As I did mention before, we do have pretty acidic soil up here in northern Michigan, so I'm really not going to add too much of this, but because this is a container plant and not a plant that I'm planting in the ground, I do want to amend the soil just a little bit. This is an organic soil acidifier made by Espoma Organics. If you've been following our channel, you know I love this brand. We use it on all of our plants, but this is a great one to use when you're planting blueberries, raspberries, any of those fruit types that really like that acidic soil. Before I add the rest of the soil into my planter here, I'm actually going to go ahead and add a couple scoops of my soil acidifier first. I don't need a ton of it because I already added peat moss and pine needles, and like I said, those are slightly acidic, so that's going to help me out. I'm going to add about 2 handfuls and really blend it in with this layer of soil here. This is what the soil acidifier looks like here. It's a really good soil acidifier. We've used it on a lot of different things. We even use it to turn our hydrangeas blue, and it's been very successful. I've added my soil blend and my soil acidifier. I have my plant seated exactly where I want it, so I'm going to go ahead and finish off topping the container with my soil blend. As you'll notice, anytime I'm working with my soil, a lot of times I'm picking it up with my hands by the handful. I really like to do this because it gives me a really good idea of what all is in my soil mix as I pick it up. Sometimes there's some rocks or some clumps of soil that I want to break up or remove. So that's something that I really like to do as I fill up the rest of my container here. I've got my container filled to the top with exactly how much soil that I want. The top of the soil is exactly in line with where the top of the soil was on the plant before I transplanted it. That's how I want to keep it. If you pile that soil up a little too tall, it could cause some rot right along the base of the stem, so you want to make sure you avoid that. Now that I have my soil line filled up to exactly where I want it, my next step is going to be fertilization. Fertilization is a new science to me. I never used to like fertilizer, actually. I've always been like a native plant gardener. A lot of the plants that I've worked with historically really don't need much fertilizer. So because I didn't know much about it, I was a little fearful of it, and I just chose not to ever use it. Now that I've really gotten into container gardening and vegetable and fruit gardening,
I've realized the importance of fertilizer cannot be understated. Fertilizer is really what drives a lot of our fruit and vegetable production. It's what creates those big, beautiful blooms that will, of course, turn into our big blueberries. And fertilizer really helps to sustain the plant, keeping it nice and healthy so that it can encourage more fruit production. Now, I have found a fertilizer that I absolutely love for our berry plants. When I say berries, I'm meaning any of our fruit that grows on a smaller shrub. So I'm talking about blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, blackberries, that genre of fruit. If you're looking at apples, peaches, a larger fruit tree, I do have a different fertilizer that I'm going to recommend for that in a different video. So back to our fertilizer, I have Berrytone. This is again an Espoma organic product, which I love. Now this is a granular fertilizer. I've only worked with granular fertilizers actually. The reason that I love granular fertilizers is they gradually break down into the soil with every watering, as opposed to a liquid fertilizer, which is all at once delivered directly to the roots of the plant. With a liquid fertilizer, you do run a higher risk of burning the plant because it's such a high dose of fertilizer and nutrients directly to the plant all at once. With a granular fertilizer, I've actually never burnt a plant on this. The granular fertilizer is, of course, granular. It looks a lot like gravel when you look at it. I will admit that some of these fertilizers do have a bit of an odor, typically that dissipates right after the first watering, and I really don't notice it after a day or two. So I have my fertilizer in my hand here. They do have exact measurements on the back. I've been using this so much that I kind of just know what I want. So really about 2 handfuls for a pot this size. And what I'm going to do is evenly sprinkle it over the surface of the soil all around the plant. I'm going to gently use my fingers just to blend that in really gently to the top of the soil line. There's no need to really dig this up and blend it in with the soil. As I mentioned before, every time you water this plant, it will gradually leak down into the soil and get down to those roots at the bottom. A little bit goes a long way. We do carry this in stock, so I'm not too sure how much we exactly go through a year, but I will say on some of our larger blueberry bushes out back, one of these bags will get us through 4 or 5 bushes throughout the course of a season, so it's a really good value overall. All right, I have my beautifully potted North Blue blueberry plant here. We're almost done. There's one last step, and I would argue that this is actually one of the most important steps when it comes to container gardening. Anytime you're working with a container plant, it is more likely to dry out faster than that same exact plant would if it was planted in the ground. And the reason for that is simply there is a lot more soil mass to help insulate the plant and prevent evaporation in the ground than there is in a container. So we do need to take some additional steps when we're working with container plants, especially container plants that need to stay consistently hydrated like blueberries. My top secret for container gardening and making sure that they retain the moisture is to add a layer of mulch. In my hands here, I just have an organic shredded cedar mulch, really high quality. It's the same exact stuff that I would mix up with the soil. It's the same exact stuff that I use in my landscaping. We just get a heap of it at the beginning of each year, and I slowly use it on my plants. Now, don't be shy with this. You want a layer of about 2 to 2.5 inches along the top. Now, there's no need to pack this down. You want to keep it really nice and fluffy. And the goal with adding this type of mulch is to help prevent evaporation off of the surface of the soil in the container, helping your plant to retain that moisture longer in between waterings. Mulch also offers a layer of protection against weeds, which will eventually pop up in your container no matter how hard you try not to, but they're much easier to weed out of a container garden than they are out of your in-ground garden. One last benefit of adding a layer of organic mulch on the top is it will eventually break down into the soil and add more of that organic nutrient back into the soil, so it's really beneficial for continuous soil health as well. One thing to keep in mind, anytime you're using mulch on top of a food producing plant, make sure it's not a dyed mulch. I cannot emphasize this enough. Oftentimes we have no idea what's being used to dye those mulches, and you definitely don't want that being leached up by a plant that is producing food for you and your family to eat. My big, beautiful blueberry bush is all planted and ready to grow me some blueberries. A couple things to keep in mind if this is your first time gardening with blueberries, don't expect to have a crop this year, and probably just a very small crop next year. Growing fruit bushes like blueberries and raspberries is truly a labor of love and one that you'll have to wait to reap the rewards on. Typically by season 3, I'm seeing some really successful blueberries come across, and by seasons 4, 5, and 6, I'm getting a full harvest in the fall each year. If you do notice any blooms come through on this plant this year, you're going to want to go ahead and pinch those back. What that does is it drives that nutrients back down into the root of the plant, really strengthening it before this year's winter comes along and encouraging it to sprout up new growth next spring. The first thing I'm going to do as soon as this video is off is thoroughly water this plant. We have some hot weather coming up next week, so I want to make sure that I'm very close to either an irrigation system or a handy hose that I can water 2 to 3 times a day. Keep in mind that your container plants are more likely to overheat and dry out than any plant that's in the ground. You can use shade cloth to help protect the roots from a lot of this heat, and you can use different things like mulch or a well-placed umbrella to help prevent excessive evaporation on the hot days. Now, in case you didn't already know, we are up here in northern Michigan. Northern Michigan winters can be a little harsh, but fortunately, a lot of my container plants do just fine over the winter. The only thing that I do to overwinter my container blueberries is simply leave them outside in an area that's protected from excessively heavy snowfall. There's an area in the back of my house that forms a little corner which offers some protection from the wind, but still allows some snowfall to hit the top of the plant. The goal with any snowfall is that as it melts, it will help to keep those roots moist. You can, of course, choose to overwinter in a greenhouse or in a garage, but if you do that, please keep in mind that you will have to water the plant occasionally throughout the winter, typically about once a month, just enough to keep the roots from drying out completely. I'll look forward to posting an update on this guy next season when he's had a while to get his roots established and really fill out this pot. If you are interested in learning more or purchasing any of the products that I mentioned in today's video, check out the description for links. If you're interested in content like this and want to see more of it, please take the time to subscribe to our channel. It really helps out small businesses like ours. If you have any questions or any experiences container gardening with your own blueberries, please leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in with me today.